Hello, I'm Dr. Jim Anderson, and welcome to an overview of engineering ethics based on the NSPE Code of Ethics for Engineers. You know, wait a minute. Ethics is never an interesting topic, and any sort of presentation that had that title wouldn't attract my attention. If I had to go to it, I'd go to it, but I'd probably spend my time doing something else. So that's not going to work for us. What we probably need to do is come up with a new presentation. Instead of talking about ethics, let's spend our time talking about something much more interesting. You. Let's rename this presentation. Let's call it How You Can Avoid Going to Jail. Because you know, if you don't know how to make good ethical decisions, that's exactly where you could end up. As engineers, we do an excellent job when we're faced with black and white decisions. We know how to apply all the information that we've gathered to make good decisions that produces designs that work well. However, when it comes to ethical decision making, the world is not black and white. Unfortunately, it's 1,000 shades of gray, and that's exactly where we can get into trouble. You've read in the newspaper about all the different people who've made poor ethical decisions and are now spending time in prison. We want to make sure that you don't join them. So if we're going to have a discussion about ethics, where should we start our discussion? Well, you know, we think that we know what ethics actually means, but do we really? Let's have a talk about this thing called ethics. Now, one of the things that people often tell me when I talk to them is that, look, you know, I understand that ethics and ethical decision making is a very important issue. However, I'm an engineer, so I don't think it really applies to me. When I read the newspaper, what I see is that financial people, stockbrokers, bankers, big fancy executives, they're the ones who have been caught doing things that are wrong. They're the ones who are being taken off to prison. It's not engineers. Well, you have a valid point. Certainly, those are the people who seem to get the press. But surprise, engineers can make poor ethical decisions just like everybody else. During our presentation today, we're going to be talking about Darlene Duan, who made some really poor ethical decisions and ended up paying the price. We'll be talking about the Albertine Three, who were 3 engineers who were in charge of cleaning up the Albertine Proving Grounds, and they made some very poor decisions. It turns out that the Department of Consumer Affairs Board for Professional Engineers maintains a website that lists all of the professional engineers who are currently under investigation for making poor decisions. There's lots of other instances in which engineers had a choice to make and picked the wrong option. There's the story of the offshore safety inspector who traded repair contracts for time with a local lady. There's also engineering employees who decided that as long as they had a government card to make purchases, they'd go ahead and buy high-priced electronic items and then turn around and sell them on eBay and make some money that they could keep. Look, these are all engineers, just like you, just like me. They were placed into situations where they had to make a decision, and they made a decision. Unfortunately for them, they made the wrong decision. Now, the NSPE provides a code of ethics for its members, which is fantastic. Their code of ethics probably should be viewed as a roadmap. It shows you how to stay on course, how you can move forward doing the right thing ethically. I view the NSPE Code of Ethics as being sort of a collection of do's, which they call the rules of practice, and don'ts, which they call professional obligations. It's interesting. If you take a look at the do's, some of these are very, shall we call it intuitive, okay? What it means is that you have to be aware of the people that you're performing your service for. You have to do it honestly and openly. These are all things that I think we can easily agree to. When you take a look at the don'ts, they also seem to be things that seem to make pretty good common sense. You shouldn't be unduly influenced by other people. You shouldn't talk badly about other engineers. These are all things that I think that we can easily agree to. Now, a roadmap is a critical part of allowing us to get to the destination that we want to get to. However, we need a little bit more guidance. We need to know how to drive. And that's what I hope to cover during the rest of this presentation. Now, I like Southwest Airlines, and I suspect you like Southwest Airlines. They have a great reputation. They're fun to fly, all their employees always seem to be happy, and they've got pretty good prices, all things considered. You wouldn't think that Southwest Airlines could have an ethics problem, but you would be wrong. A few years ago, Southwest Airlines got into a lot of trouble with the FAA, the regulatory body that regulates all airlines. So what happened? How did Southwest Airlines go so wrong? Well, here's the way it works. Every airplane has to be inspected. We know that. It turns out that there's a deeper level of inspection. After a certain number of flight hours, airplanes have to be taken out of service and have to be given a very thorough inspection to ensure that everything's still working. Not a problem with that either. The problem is that while the airline is out of service, it won't be making any money for the airplane company. Southwest had a relationship with an FAA inspector who eventually ended up leaving the FAA. He then went to work for Southwest Airlines. No problems with that. That's perfectly permitted. However, he retained all of his friends and his contacts in the FAA. What happened next was that Southwest Airlines was in the middle of their busy season where all their planes were being constantly used. A number of their planes came up as being eligible for that deep level inspection. Their brand new Southwest employee, who previously had worked for the FAA, went over to the FAA people that he used to work with and whispered in their ear that it wasn't really necessary to take those planes out of service right now. They could keep flying for a little while longer until they hit their low season and weren't needed as much. The FAA staff agreed with them. Why not? He used to be their coworker. So the planes were allowed to fly. In fact, Southwest Airlines had an additional 60,000 flights that should have never happened. When the FAA found out what had gone on, they fined Southwest Airlines $1.5 million, and they changed FAA policies. So now if you work for the FAA and you leave the FAA, for the next 2 years, you cannot interact in any way with an airplane company. So there was options, there was decisions, and there was mistakes made here. We like Southwest Airlines. It's a wonderful company. It does a great job. But even Southwest can make mistakes. If they can make mistakes, what hope is there for the rest of us? So what is ethics? Well, it's a good question. Ethics refers to a well-founded standards of right and wrong. And I think we all know that. It's making the right decisions. It's trying to put us in different situations where we can figure out the rights, obligations, and the benefits both to people and to others based on the decisions that we make. Something that a lot of us probably don't realize is that actually ethics refers to something else also. It refers to the study and development of one's ethical standards. And the reason that this is important is we need to understand that ethics isn't something that's fixed. We don't just have a set of ethical decision-making skills and that's the end of the story. Rather, our sense of ethics and our ability to make good ethical decisions is something that is constantly evolving. What happens is as we go through life, we have a different set of experiences. We learn new things, we see different things, and these impact us and they change us. And what that means is that it's going to be constantly evolving, constantly changing how we make ethical decisions. So we should never view our sense of ethics as being something fixed. Rather, we should view it as something, hopefully, that is constantly getting better and better. So what does ethics mean to you? Hopefully, you understand ethical decision-making is all about deciding to do something. You know, a lot of us have a lot of troubles with that. You know, we're good at collecting data, we're good at analyzing data, but when it comes to actually making a decision, that's where we struggle just a little bit. And if you turn it into an ethical decision, oh my goodness. Now all of a sudden you've got a real challenge in front of you. But we all end up having to make ethical decisions. So we have to get comfortable with that concept. In its simplest form, you need to view ethical decision as being a choice between two outcomes. One, you can make the right decision. Two, you can make the wrong decision. Now, if it was that simple, this would be a very short presentation. But of course, nothing in life is ever that simple. Why? Well, because remember, when you make a decision, there will be results of your decision. Okay? You would like to think that if you choose to do the right thing, good things would happen. Sadly, I've got to report to you, if you choose to do the right thing, a lot of things can happen, including you losing your job, your company could go out of business, and everybody you know could end up shunning you. Now, interestingly enough, if you choose to do the wrong thing, there's a good chance you could get a lot of money, you could be promoted, and of course, you could go to jail. Maybe. Well, that doesn't seem right. You know, if we lived in a Disney movie, it would be flipped around, right? You'd get promoted in money for doing the right thing, and you'd go to jail if you did the wrong thing. Well, I don't disagree with you there. But we don't live in a Disney movie. And your ethical decisions will have consequences, and you won't necessarily control those consequences. You do need to live with the results of your decision, but you don't necessarily control what those results are. And this is an awareness that you need to always have. Now, I can hear already a lot of you are saying, look, I don't need any training in this. I already know how to make good ethical decisions. Look, I knew two things. First off, you're not supposed to shoot people. And secondly, you're not supposed to rob banks. Okay? Basically, I know how to make ethical decisions. Thank you very much. Well, congratulations. I think I'd have to agree with you on both of those points. However, you know, if we change things just a little bit, it's going to get a lot more complicated. For example, you walk into a room, you see someone standing over a body on the floor, they've got a sharp knife in their hands. They look up, they look at you straight in the eyes, and they start running towards you. You have a gun in your hands. What do you do? Well, you know, I've been watching The Walking Dead, so I know exactly what to do, right? Stop. One answer, of course, is you shoot them. You feel threatened. It's clearly they've done something horrible. You have to defend yourself. End of story. Thank you very much. Well, stop. Do you know that they actually harmed the person who was on the floor? Maybe they came along and found him there. Maybe they just picked up the knife. Now, they're running towards you, so clearly they were going to attack you, right? Well, maybe. Or is there somebody behind you? Or maybe they had just decided to leave the room and you were blocking the door. That does get to be a little bit tricky. Now, we decided that it was wrong to rob a bank. Okay, we're fine with that. So let's put you in a different situation. You lost your job a year ago. You're in the process of being evicted from your apartment. You're going to be kicked out tomorrow. Your life partner is 9 3/4 months pregnant. She's on bed rest. She really can't get up to help you pack up the apartment, and arguably, she really shouldn't be moving right now. You're out, you're walking down the street, and you come along a wallet sitting there in the middle of the street, clearly stuffed with cash. What do you do? Well, what's the right decision? Well, probably the right decision. Pick up the wallet, go find a policeman, turn it into the policeman. The police will hold on to it for a while. I guess if they don't find anybody, they'll give it back to you. If somebody claims it and comes back, maybe they'd give you a reward, or else they'd just say thank you very much, and you're still going to get evicted from your apartment. What's the alternative? Keep the wallet. Use the cash to pay your rent. Don't get kicked out of the apartment. Your extremely pregnant significant other is able to stay in the apartment until the baby comes, and you move on with your life. What's the right decision? I don't know. All right, that's fair. Congratulations. Welcome to the world of ethical decision making. This is not easy stuff to do. Now, as engineers, we make decisions every single day. Whether it's what capacitor should go into a design, what truss should be used in something that's being built, or what surface should be used on a road that's being built. We're comfortable with this. Now, there's a reason that we're comfortable making decisions. The reason is because the way we make those decisions is based on formulas and processes that have been laid out by others. We went to school, we learned what the formulas were, now we take them and we apply them in our job. We know if we apply the formula, it's going to produce a result. We're going to use that result. The circuit will work, the structure will stand, and the road will not wear out because we made the right decision. And we're comfortable doing that. All right, that's what it means to be an engineer. Then we get to that ethical decision-making stuff. The problem with making ethical decisions is that it's not always an either-or. It's often a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decision that you have to choose between. And I've got some other bad news for you. All of your options are bad. There's not a single good option there. So your challenge as an ethical decision maker isn't to pick the right decision. Rather, it's to choose the least bad decision. You know, we're not trained for this. This isn't something we're necessarily good at. As engineers, we're looking for the decision that works the best. When we're confronted with a situation as an ethical decision making in which we have to make a decision that's not the best decision, we have a tendency to freeze up. Or even worse, to avoid making a decision altogether. And neither one of those options are acceptable in this situation. We need to make a decision. And more importantly, we need to know how to make the right decision. Now, ethics didn't just show up yesterday. Ethics has been around since the beginning of time. Okay? We first become aware of people talking about ethics, thinking about ethics, all the way back in 350 BC. You know, Plato, we've all heard of Plato, the really smart guy, the philosopher, who we know because people wrote down stuff about him and it's hung out for 2,300 years. He was probably the first person to spend time thinking about what it meant to make ethical decisions. Now, he was the instructor for Aristotle. Aristotle is a critical person to all engineers because Aristotle is universally recognized as being the first scientist. He's the guy who took the time to basically classify plants and animals. He did some initial physics research, and he spent a lot of time thinking about ethical decision making. He's also important because Aristotle was the instructor for a lot of important military figures of their time. So he had an incredible impact on the world as it stood for a long time. His thoughts on ethical decision making stood up until about the 1700s. And one of his students, Alexander the Great, went on to conquer the entire known world. So what did Aristotle think when it came to ethical decision making? Aristotle saw the world in terms of right and wrong, as we all do in terms of ethical decision making. He came up with an idea that he called the golden mean. And the golden mean lies between good decisions and bad decisions. And Aristotle said, listen, your decisions, your ethical decisions should lie along this line. What does that actually mean? Well, good question. So let's say that you have an opportunity to open up a new factory. You can open up that factory and it will not produce any pollution. Not bad, but it's going to employ 5 people. All right, that's one option. You could open up the factory and it's going to pollute a little bit, but it's going to employ 10,000 people. All right, maybe that's better. Or you could open up a factory that's a heavy polluter, but you're going to employ 50,000 people. Which option do you choose? Well, you know, I'm all for not polluting, so that's a powerful option. But that's only going to employ 5 people. If I can come up with jobs for 10,000 people, that seems like that'd be better. But of course, look, if I'm so crazy about providing jobs for people, then I may as well go with the really bad decision because I'm going to employ 50,000 people, even though I'm polluting a lot. What Aristotle said is, listen, you're going to have to come up with a compromise someplace. And you want it to fit somewhere in between the best decision and the worst decision. Make it align with the golden mean. Now, Aristotle also said that virtues are wonderful. What are virtues? Honesty, for example, is a virtue. He said, you may call yourself an honest person, but that does not make you an honest person. Instead, you need to understand virtues are things that have to be exercised. You have to go around practicing being honest. If you do this enough, it will become permanent. It will become part of you. But basically, if you don't exercise it, then it won't become a trait. Now, this means it's all about habits. How you behave has a great deal to do with the type of ethical decisions that you're going to end up making. Okay? So what kind of behavior do you have? Honesty, charity, politeness? Fantastic. As a society, we consider those to all be really good things. Lying, stealing, rudeness? No, those are bad things, but they could be habits that you have. You could also have a combination of these habits. You know, when I was growing up, one of the rock groups at the time was a group called Rush. And they had a song called The New World Man. The lyrics in there have something that probably relates to this pretty well. It says, you're old enough to know what's right, but young enough not to choose it. And ultimately, when it comes down to habits, that's probably the case. We know we shouldn't lie, steal, and be rude. It doesn't mean that we don't do it, though. So, from an engineering point of view, ethics boils down to answering two questions. First off, what is the right thing to do? We certainly can't choose it if we don't know what it is. But once we've identified what the right thing to do is, we now have to answer the question, why should I do that? Every decision that we have, every decision that we make, comes with its own set of consequences. And are you going to be willing to put up with the consequences from choosing to do the right thing? That's a critical factor. Now, do we learn to be ethical, or is it part of who we are? Excellent question. And it's actually the exact type of question that scientists love to look into. So they've taken a look at who else? Babies. And the question they've asked is, are babies ethical? Well, you know, that's interesting. They haven't had any life experiences, so if they are, it's got to be a bit ingrained. They've discovered some very interesting things. They did some interesting experiments with 1-year-olds. They showed them a puppet show. During the puppet shows, one of the puppets took a ball and ran off with it. What they discovered is that the babies didn't want to have anything to do with that character after the show was over. Interesting. Now, the scientists weren't satisfied with that, so they went on, and they did some experiments with 5-month-old babies. Okay? What they showed the babies is people interacting positively, helping each other. And then they showed people not interacting well and shunning or not interacting with each other. What they found is that the babies were drawn to the people who interacted well, and they were repelled by the people who did not interact well. So it looks like ethics or ethical decision-making is a core part of who we are. We can't get away from that. Doesn't mean that we're always going to make good ethical decisions, but it does mean that we understand what it means to make a good decision. So, ethics is a big, sticky, messy thing. And whenever you have a big, sticky, messy thing, you know that not everybody is going to view this as being exactly the same thing. So, surprise, guess what? The really smart people who spend time thinking about ethics have come up with 3 completely different ways to view ethics. One of these is called metaethics, and it aims to define the meaning in terms that we use. So it says, what do we mean when we say something's good? What do we mean when we say something is bad? Let's understand what people are trying to communicate when they say that. Alternatively, there's a field of thought called descriptive ethics. And this describes people's ethical views and values. How do we see the world? So metaethics is talking about the terms that we use to describe things. Descriptive ethics is talking about how we view the world. And we're not satisfied with just having 2 ways to look at things, so we add one more called normative ethics. And it says, listen, forget how things are, forget how we view the world. Instead, how should we be living our lives in order to be ethical? Oh, great. So you've got 3 to choose from. Pick which one appeals to you the most. Okay, metaethics. Let's start with this. So metaethics is not about you, and it's not about me. Rather, it's all about good and bad, and trying to understand what makes something inherently good Likewise, what makes something inherently bad? We recognize good and bad. We can point it out. We can explain it to other people. But what characteristics of something actually determines whether it is a good thing or a bad thing? Interesting question. Now, the folks who are into metaethics also have a concept of moral realism. And what this says is, look, goodness exists in the world, okay? What we have to do is we have to find it and we have to mine it, almost like it's a gold mine. It's out there, it's a matter of us actually finding it. Now, there's another field of thought called anti-realists. And what they say is that, no, you've got it wrong. Good and bad is not out there in the world. Rather, good and bad lives inside of us. And if you want to tap into good and bad, you have to look inside yourself to find it. So the anti-realists believe basically the opposite of the moral realists. Moral realists believe that good and bad's out in the world. It's up to us to find it. Anti-realists believe that it's inside of us. And if we want to find it, all we have to do is look inside ourselves, and we can find the true meaning of both good and bad. Great. These are just the people you'd like to invite to a cocktail party. Now, that's not all. Remember, there's another view of thought. It's called descriptive ethics. Now, the folks who believe in descriptive ethics believe that different groups of people are going to view good and bad differently. And so they spend a great deal of time studying these different groups of people. They think that people can approach different levels of ethical decision making. You know, as children, we start out as one way. As we grow older, our view of ethics and ethical decision changes. And of course, as we reach a later stage in life, we'll have yet another view of how to make ethical decisions. And depending on which group of people we belong to, we will evolve differently. People are different, is the gist there. The final group that we're dealing with here is called the normative ethics folks. They feel that you can subscribe to ethical behavior. Okay? They feel that in order to be an ethical person, there's a series of things that you actually need to do. All right? That makes sense. Okay? But the question, and really probably the $64,000 question for all of us is, what's that list? If you could give me that list, I'd be taken care of. I don't think the list actually exists. But the normative ethics people are searching for it, right? And if they can find the list, or if they could at least find a few of the things that are on that list, then that's something that we could all subscribe to. Great. So where does this leave us? Well, I think we can agree that ethics is not cut and dried. Ethics, I can't give you a sheet of paper that says, listen, follow the things on this piece of paper, and I guarantee that you will always make good ethical decisions. Can't do that. It doesn't exist. You know, we've been looking at ethics and what ethics means for over 2,000 years. We still haven't solved this problem yet, right? As engineers, we desperately want to have a formula. We want to have a methodology. We want to have a way to do experiments and come up with something that gives us a tangible result that we can apply in all the situations that we find ourselves in going forward. And I've got some really bad news for you. In terms of ethics and ethical decision making, it doesn't seem to exist. We've been thinking about it for a long time, and it's just not there. Does that mean that we need to throw our hands up? Say, look, this is obviously something that can't be solved? No, absolutely not. Look, so people have been thinking about this for a long time. The philosophers have come up with a lot of different ways to think about ethics, to look at ethics, to talk and describe ethics. Okay? And based on all of the work that they've done, frameworks have been created. So really, we've got a big question before us now. The frameworks that have been created based on all of the philosophical thinking through the ages. Can we use any of those frameworks? Can we apply them to our lives and say, look, now I've got a framework, I can make good ethical decisions as long as I stay within that framework? It's an excellent question, and that's what we're going to be talking about next.